In recent months, a striking development has emerged in the escalating trade conflict between the United States and the People's Republic of China. What began as a series of punitive tariffs has evolved into a sophisticated network of circumvention tactics, allowing Chinese exporters to sidestep duties of up to 145%. This report delves into the mechanics of that operation, evaluates the legal ambiguities enabling it, and assesses its implications for American trade policy and political discourse. The origins of this episode trace back to March 2018, when President Donald Trump imposed steep levies on a wide range of Chinese imports, in some cases reaching 145% of the product's declared value. The administration framed these measures as necessary to rectify trade imbalances and to punish what it termed unfair Chinese industrial practices. However, from the outset, Beijing refused to engage in substantive negotiations. Chinese officials publicly stated that they had not entered and did not plan to enter talks with the Trump administration, flatly contradicting assertions from the White House that discussions were ongoing. Yet the standoff belied a mutual dependency. US importers and Chinese manufacturers alike recognized that the American consumer market remained too valuable to abandon. Despite the intended pressure on China's export sector, the duties ultimately fall on importers, who must either absorb the added cost or pass it on to consumers. Faced with the prospect of a 145% surcharge, many sought alternative channels rather than forego the US market entirely. Enter the transshipment strategy. Rather than direct shipments from China to the United States, goods are routed through intermediary countries, most notably Malaysia and other Southeast Asian nations, where they undergo minimal processing or repackaging before onward export. By doing so, these products can qualify for significantly lower tariffs, often as little as 10% or even zero if covered by separate trade agreements between the intermediary nation and Washington. Central to this maneuver is the doctrine of substantial transformation, the criterion by which US Customs and Border Protection, CBP, determines country of origin. Under US law, a good may only claim a new origin if it has been altered to the extent that its fundamental character has changed. Unfortunately for enforcement efforts, the regulation provides no precise threshold, leaving considerable grey area. China's exporters have exploited this ambiguity, engaging in what some analysts call product laundering. In practice, several methods are deployed. The most rudimentary involves simple relabeling. Goods manufactured in China are shipped to Malaysia, stripped of their original packaging, and then reboxed under new labels bearing Made in Malaysia. While this approach has drawn scrutiny from Malaysian authorities and occasional crackdowns, it persists where enforcement is lax. A more elaborate technique separates the product itself from its packaging during transit. The components arrive independently in Malaysia. The manufactured item travels in bulk, while packaging materials move separately. Upon arrival, local facilities undertake assembly, placing the item into its packaging, thereby creating what CBP could interpret as a substantial transformation. Though less blatant than repackaging alone, this practice further strains the ability of customs officials to verify true origins. These operations are not limited to Southeast Asia alone. Reports indicate that other nations have quietly agreed to facilitate similar processes, keen to attract export processing business while declining to jeopardize relations with Beijing. Yet Malaysia remains the most prominent participant, its infrastructure and proximity to China making it an ideal hub. The efficacy of US tariffs now hinges on the capability of CBP to untangle these supply chain redirections. Custom officials face the formidable task of inspecting container manifests, tracing manufacturing records, and conducting physical examinations, all while managing a vast volume of imports. As a consequence, only a fraction of suspect shipments face challenge, and even fewer result in retroactive application of higher duties. From the perspective of US trade policy, the result is stark. Tariffs that were designed to exert maximum pain on Chinese exporters are instead being absorbed via transshipment, minimizing the economic impact on China while transferring costs to American businesses and consumers. Retailers up the supply chain confront higher compliance costs and uncertainty, potentially eroding the advantages of domestic production or alternative sourcing. Politically, these developments undercut the narrative advanced by tariff proponents in the Trump administration. President Trump repeatedly asserted that imposing duties would compel China to negotiate on terms favorable to the United States. Instead, China has maintained its stance of public non-engagement and has developed strategies that blunt the financial pressure intended to bring it to the bargaining table. In sum, the current episode underscores the adaptability of global supply chains and the limitations of unilateral tariff measures. While duties of 145% might appear formidable, they are only as effective as the enforcement mechanisms supporting them. In the absence of decisive action to close loopholes in the substantial transformation doctrine, transshipment through intermediaries will continue to erode the intended impact of US trade policy. Looking ahead, policymakers face a choice. Strengthen customs regulations by clearly defining substantial transformation criteria, negotiate multilateral agreements that reduce reliance on punitive tariffs, or pursue a combination of both. Without such steps, the trade war may persist as an exercise in political posturing, one in which tariffs are levied in the rhetoric of tough diplomacy, yet readily circumvented in practice. Ultimately, the story of China's tariff avoidance tactics is also a story about the contours of modern globalization. It reflects how national policy objectives can clash with the realities of cross-border manufacturing and the ingenuity of private actors. As Washington and Beijing navigate this impasse, the fate of billions of dollars in goods and the consumers who purchase them remains entangled in a web of paperwork, repackaging, and regulatory grey zones. Beyond closing the substantial transformation loophole, US authorities could bolster enforcement through increased data sharing agreements with intermediary countries. By establishing joint customs task forces and exchanging shipment manifests in real time, CBP and its counterparts could more readily identify suspect cargo patterns, such as frequent low-value shipments inconsistent with declared quantities. In parallel, requiring greater transparency from importers regarding supply chain origins, mandating detailed bills of materials and affidavits substantiated by third-party audits, would shift the burden of proof away from under-resourced inspectors and onto the firms most directly benefiting from tariff avoidance. Legislative action could further streamline adjudication of country of origin disputes. Congress might direct U.S. trade representative offices to develop binding interpretive rulings that specify clear thresholds for substantial transformation, such as minimum value-add percentages or defined physical processing steps. Embedding these criteria in law would reduce interpretive variance across CBP districts and discourage exploitative litigation strategies aimed at delaying duty assessments. On the diplomatic front, Washington could seek to align with allies facing similar transshipment challenges, notably members of the European Union and Japan. A coordinated multilateral approach, whereby partner customs administrations adopt harmonized rules, would diminish the incentive for exporters to redirect shipments through any one jurisdiction. By contrast, unilateral enforcement tends only to reroute circumvention pathways rather than eliminate them. Finally, the administration should consider complementing tariffs with targeted investment in US manufacturing competitiveness. Improving domestic production capacity and workforce training would reduce reliance on imported intermediate goods, thereby diminishing the leverage of transshipment networks. Coupled with enhanced enforcement, such measures could help restore the efficacy of trade remedies and reinforce the credibility of US trade policy. Absent these reforms, the cycle of tariff evasion is likely to continue, leaving policymakers locked in an escalating contest between punitive measures and ever more inventive avoidance strategies. The ultimate resolution will require not only tougher customs oversight, but a comprehensive strategy that addresses both the economic incentives and regulatory gaps underpinning modern global trade.